I defended myself against my wife. It ruined my life, and now she's shocked I'm divorcing her. All right, I'm going to be honest. This is not a post I ever thought I'd write. But here I am, sitting in my living room at 2 a.m., feeling like the lowest scum on earth, waiting to see if my wife actually called the cops on me. Yep, this is my life right now. I'm 23, and I hit my wife tonight. It's probably the biggest mistake of my life, and I'm not even trying to make excuses for it. I'm just here to lay it out, hoping to get something off my chest and maybe find out if anyone else has been through something this messed up. First off, a bit of background. I married my wife, who's 31, just a few months ago. We'd been together for a couple of years and things felt right. Or at least I thought they did. She was this strong, confident woman with her life together. Like, she had a whole career, a nice apartment, friends, everything. I was honestly kind of in awe of her. I mean, I was 19 when we met and she was already established. It felt like she knew exactly what she wanted, and being around her was like a breath of fresh air from the chaotic, aimless life I was living. She just seemed so stable, so sure of herself. Little did I know, right? Anyway, things were amazing at first. She was caring, attentive, and super supportive. She helped me get my first decent job, helped me set up my own place, everything. I felt like I'd hit the jackpot with her. So when she suggested we get married, I was all in. I didn't think twice about it. I was just over the moon, thinking I'd be with someone who actually had my back. And yeah, maybe I should have paid more attention to certain things, but love makes you kind of stupid, right? But the second we got married, things started changing. She just started acting different. I don't even know how to explain it. Like, she went from being this supportive person to someone who would just snap at me over every little thing. She'd say I was too messy or too lazy, even though I was trying hard to keep up. Then it got worse. She'd get angry at the smallest stuff, and before I knew it, things would escalate. And by escalate, I mean she'd start throwing things, yelling, sometimes even hitting me. At first, I figured she was just stressed. Like maybe she was feeling the pressure of us moving in together, combining finances, and dealing with all that adult crap that no one ever really teaches you about. But it just kept happening. And each time, it got a little worse. And here's the thing, I didn't know what to do. I didn't tell anyone because honestly, who's going to believe a guy when he says his wife is hitting him? It sounds pathetic even saying it now, but that's how I felt. So I just took it, thinking maybe I was the one messing things up. Tonight, though, tonight was a whole new level. We just finished dinner, and I don't even remember how it started, but she got really mad. Like, off the rails mad. She started yelling at me, saying I was useless, that I didn't care about her. Then out of nowhere, she grabbed this glass from the table and just threw it at me. Bam! Right to the head. It didn't break, but it hit me so hard I saw stars. Before I could even process that, she was on top of me, fists flying. She was actually hitting me, screaming that I'd ruined her life, and I'm just lying there, trying to block the hits, trying to get her to stop. I kept telling her, please stop, just calm down. But she wasn't having it. I don't know what came over me, but I just reacted. My hand went up and I hit her, right in the face. As soon as it happened, I regretted it. The look on her face was like I'd just crossed some line I could never uncross. She started crying, holding her face, and she just backed away from me like I was some kind of monster. She didn't say anything after that, just got up and ran to the guest room, locked herself in. I could hear her sobbing, and then she yelled through the door that she was calling the cops. I begged her not to, but she wouldn't even answer. And here I am, sitting here, waiting to see if the cops are actually going to show up. I don't know if she called them for real or if she's just messing with me, but either way, I feel like my whole life's gone off the rails. This isn't me. I've never hit anyone in my life, let alone a woman. I was raised to believe you never, ever do that. And here I am, sitting here with my head spinning, thinking, how did I get to this point? I keep running it over in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Maybe I should have left the first time she threw something at me. Maybe I should have seen the signs. But I didn't. And now I'm here, a guy who hit his wife, just waiting to be hauled off to jail. I feel so damn low. Honestly, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. If the cops come, I'm probably screwed. I know they'll see her bruised face and think I'm some kind of monster. And maybe I am. I'm sitting here, staring at the clock, trying to decide if I should just leave, but I don't even know where I'd go. I've got no friends nearby, no family who'd take me in right now. And the worst part? I can't shake this feeling that she's getting exactly what she wanted. She's won somehow, and I'm the idiot sitting here like a fish on a hook, waiting for the inevitable. And yeah, maybe people are going to tell me I was dumb for marrying her. Maybe they'll say the age gap should have been a red flag, or that I was stupid to think someone like her would actually want me. I get it. I see it now. But at the time, I was just a kid in love, thinking I'd found someone amazing. She was the first person who made me feel like I was worth something, and I bought into that hook, line, and sinker. I keep thinking about all the good moments we had before we got married, wondering if any of it was real or if she was just playing me the whole time. It's like she flipped a switch as soon as we said I do, and I got to see the real her. And now, after tonight, I feel like I've shown her the worst side of me too. It's like we've both been hiding who we really are, and now it's all come out and it's ugly as hell. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Just a guy who hit his wife, waiting to see if I'm about to spend the night in jail. If anyone's been through something like this, I don't even know what to ask. Advice? I don't know if there's any advice that's going to fix this. But if anyone's listening, thanks for hearing me out. Feels a little better to just get it out there. Update 1. So I didn't think this post will blow out and everyone is asking for an update, so here it is. The police showed up at my door. They banged on the door like they were coming for a drug bust. I wanted to bolt, just throw my stuff in a bag and get the hell out. But I froze. I knew there was no running from this. It's weird. In movies, the police coming for you feels so far off, but when it's actually happening, it's like everything goes numb. I opened the door, and there were 2 cops standing there asking if they could come in. My heart was racing, but I said yes because, well, what else could I do? The way they looked at me, it felt like I was already guilty. They looked around the living room, and the place was a mess. Broken glass, chairs tipped over. The whole scene just looked bad. It was like the place itself was snitching on me. Then my wife came out of the guest room with her face all bruised, a real black eye that seemed to scream, "Look what he did!" She wasn't crying anymore. She just looked victorious, like she knew she'd won. The cop asked me what happened, and I tried explaining that it wasn't as simple as it looked. I told him she'd been hitting me first, that I was only defending myself, but I could tell by his expression he didn't believe a word. He looked at my busted lip, but it didn't seem to matter. My words were just bouncing off him. All he cared about was her black eye. One of the cops pulled me aside and told me to turn around. Then he put the cuffs on me. That feeling, having cuffs on, is one of the worst things I've ever experienced. My hands locked behind my back, metal digging into my wrists. It was real in a way that made my stomach turn. They walked me out to the squad car, and I could feel every single one of my neighbors staring. Faces peeking through windows, the whispers. People who'd only seen me as the guy who'd mow his lawn or take out the trash were now watching me get loaded into a police car. I've never felt so exposed and humiliated in my life. Sitting in that back seat, it was like I was on autopilot. The cop was reading me my rights, but I barely processed a word. My mind was racing, replaying the whole night over and over. The glass hitting me, her fists, me hitting her back. I kept wondering, how did it come to this? And even though I knew I'd hit her in self-defense, all I could think about was how I'd broken this massive rule that I swore I'd never break. When we got to the station, they took my fingerprints, my photo, the whole mugshot deal. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted dream. Like, this couldn't actually be my life. I kept thinking I'd wake up, but the reality just kept getting more solid. They told me I was being held on a misdemeanor for domestic assault and battery. The words felt heavy, like they had their own weight. My first offense, they said, but it didn't make me feel any better. After that, they put me in a holding cell. It was cold, and there was this weird smell, a mix of bleach and sweat. I sat there on this hard bench, looking at the gray walls, feeling the concrete under me. I could hear people talking in other cells, some guy yelling to be let out, another just mumbling to himself. I sat in silence, trying not to lose it. I wanted to cry, scream, something, but I was too numb to even react. Hours passed. They don't tell you anything in there, just leave you to sit with your thoughts. It was Easter weekend, so I was stuck there until Monday. No calls, no explanations, just sitting there feeling lower than I ever have in my life. I knew my wife was probably home, telling everyone her side of the story, painting me as the villain. And yeah, maybe I deserved some of it. But I knew in my gut that she'd leave out the part where she hit me first, where she threw the glass, where she was the one who kept pushing until I snapped. On Sunday, I finally got my call. I couldn't even think of who to call. My family and I aren't on the best terms, and honestly, I was too ashamed to let them know what happened. So I just sat there, staring at the phone, feeling like I had no one. When Monday rolled around, I finally got to see a judge. They went over the charges, said I could face up to a year in jail. A year. The reality of it hit me like a ton of bricks. All for one night, one stupid night that I'll regret for the rest of my life. When they let me go, it was like stepping out into a whole different world. I didn't even have my phone or wallet. I had no idea where my wife was or if she'd still be at the house. Part of me hoped she wasn't. I just wanted to crawl back into bed and pretend none of this happened. When I got home, she was gone. No note, no explanation, just an empty house. She'd taken the dog too, which stung more than I can even explain. That dog was mine. I'd had him since I was 16. She never even liked him, always complained about the shedding and barking, but she took him anyway. That's when it hit me. She was out to ruin me. It wasn't enough for her to just win the fight. She had to strip me of everything that mattered to me. It was like she wanted to erase me. I sat down in the middle of my empty living room, looking around at all the chaos. The broken glass, the tipped-over furniture, everything left as it was from the fight. It looked like a crime scene. And in a way, I guess it was. This was where everything came crashing down. This was where my life took a turn I never saw coming. I called a couple of places looking for a lawyer. Turns out lawyers aren't cheap, and I just lost my job because I couldn't show up after the arrest. My boss didn't want to hear my excuses. He just wanted to keep his record clean, so he fired me on the spot. I felt so lost, like everything I'd worked for was gone in one weekend. No job, no wife, not that I wanted her back, and no dog. I was empty, just going through the motions. That night, I sat in that empty house, and it was silent, eerie even. I couldn't even sit still. I was too anxious, too restless. All I could do was replay everything over and over, wishing I'd done something, anything different. But here I was, facing the reality of my choices, trying to figure out what the hell comes next. So after that whole mess, the next logical step was figuring out my next move. And honestly, I wasn't left with many options. The house was empty, I was jobless, my dog was gone, and my wife had left this heavy silence behind like it was some kind of final stamp. The one place I could think to go was my parents. We hadn't really been close since I got with my wife, but they were all I had now. I knew they'd be surprised to see me on their doorstep, but I didn't know if they'd be angry or relieved. They weren't supportive of the relationship from day one. They thought the age gap was weird and, well, that I was making a mistake. I think they knew something I didn't or saw things I couldn't. But at that point, I was willing to take the chance that they'd let me in, even if it meant swallowing my pride. When I got there, I knocked on the door and just waited, my stomach a complete wreck. My mom opened the door, and for a split second, I thought she might slam it in my face. Instead, she just stared, and I could see she was trying to figure out if I was really standing there. Then she stepped aside and let me in without a word. That moment was such a huge relief. It felt like a tiny bit of normalcy in a world that was completely upside down. My dad was in the living room, and he looked shocked too, but he didn't say anything. They just let me sit down, and for a while, we sat there in silence. I guess they were waiting for me to speak, but it was hard to find the right words. Finally, I told them everything. How things had changed after we got married, how she'd become someone I didn't recognize, and how that last fight went down. I didn't hold back any of it. It was painful, and yeah, embarrassing as hell. But I had to be honest. Mom was quiet, just nodding as I spoke, but I could tell she was taking it all in. She didn't look at me like I was some monster. She looked sad, like she'd known this was coming but had hoped she was wrong. My dad listened without saying a word, just staring at the floor. When I finished, I expected them to be angry or say, "We told you so." But they didn't. They just listened. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel totally alone. After I was done talking, my mom asked, "What are you going to do now?" I had no idea. I told her I'd lost my job, that the charges were hanging over my head, and that I didn't even know where my wife was or if she'd come back. I couldn't stay at the house, not with the way it felt now, and I didn't have any savings to fall back on. It was like every safety net I thought I had been yanked away. That's when my mom surprised me. She didn't criticize me or ask why I'd married her. She just said, "Stay here as long as you need." Those words hit me hard. It was the last thing I expected, and honestly, it was like a weight lifting off my chest. I hadn't realized how heavy everything felt until that moment. Then my dad spoke up. He's a quiet guy, doesn't usually get involved in emotional stuff, but he looked at me and said, "If she's been hurting you, you need to protect yourself. We'll help you figure this out." He didn't look angry or disappointed. He just looked determined. It was like he'd already decided they were going to help me, no matter what I'd done. We sat and talked about what to do next. My mom suggested getting a lawyer to help with the charges and maybe looking into a divorce. The word hit me hard. Divorce. It felt so final. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it was the only way out of this mess. There was no going back to the way things were. not after everything that had happened. My mom offered to help cover the lawyer costs, which was a big deal for them. We aren't exactly rich, and I knew it was a lot to ask, but they didn't hesitate. After a while, my mom got up and made us some dinner. It was a simple meal, just sandwiches and soup, but it was the first real meal I'd had since everything went down. I'd been running on stress and coffee, but sitting there, eating with my parents, it was like I could finally breathe again. I didn't realize how much I missed that feeling of just being safe, being home. That night, as I lay in my old room, staring at the ceiling, it felt strange being back. It was like I'd traveled back in time, and I half expected to wake up and realize this was all just some nightmare. But I knew it wasn't. My life was a mess, and the only thing left was to figure out how to put the pieces back together. I didn't have any illusions that it would be easy, but for the first time, I felt like maybe it was possible. The next day, my mom set up a meeting with a lawyer she knew. She didn't tell me she knew him from work, she's a cop, but I figured it out eventually. He agreed to help with both the charges and the divorce, told me we'd take it one step at a time. I was still facing potential jail time, and there was no guarantee things would go my way, but it was a start. At least now I had a plan, something to hold on to. Leaving my wife felt like ripping off a band-aid, but every time I thought about staying with her, about going back, it felt even worse. The way she had looked at me, that victorious look when she knew I'd be the one going to jail, kept replaying in my mind. That wasn't love. That wasn't even a normal marriage. It was twisted, and I'd been too blind to see it until it was way too late. The next few days passed in a blur of lawyer meetings and filling out paperwork. I barely spoke to my parents, and honestly, they didn't push. They'd check in on me, bring me food, give me space when I needed it. I felt guilty for being back, like I was a burden, but they never made me feel that way. They just kept saying they were glad I was home, that I wasn't alone. Looking back, I realize now how lucky I was to have them. I'd spent so long thinking they were against me that they didn't understand my choices, but they were the only ones who had my back when it really mattered. I know this might not mean much to anyone reading this, but for me, that feeling of finally being understood was like a lifeline. So, that's where I'm at now, living in my old room, working through the legal stuff, trying to piece my life back together one day at a time. It's not easy, and some days it feels like I'm barely holding on, but I'm getting through it. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I'm starting to believe there's a way out of this. Update 2. After a few days of just existing in my old room and filling out legal paperwork, I finally got a call from my lawyer. He'd done some digging into my wife's history, and it turns out I wasn't the first one to go through this with her. Yeah, she had a record, charges of domestic abuse, a restraining order from her ex-husband, all this stuff she'd somehow kept hidden from me. I knew she'd been married before, but I'd bought her story that he was the one who'd hurt her. I trusted her, and I never questioned it. Now that trust just felt like the punchline to some sick joke. I don't know what it says about me that hearing all that didn't make me feel better. If anything, it made me feel worse. Like, how could I be so blind? I'd been so sure I'd found someone special, someone who got me. I mean, who wouldn't be thrilled to have someone older, more experienced, someone who seemed like she had it all figured out? I thought I was lucky, that I'd won some kind of relationship lottery. Turns out I was just the next in line. The lawyer asked if I wanted to press charges against her for the assault and property damage. At first, I didn't know. The thought of dragging this whole thing into court felt like keeping myself trapped in this mess. But then, I thought about my dog. He was more than just a pet to me. He was part of my life, and she'd taken him just to hurt me. That's when I knew I couldn't just let this slide. I needed to stand up for myself, even if it meant seeing this whole thing through to the bitter end. So I told my lawyer, yeah, let's do it. I was done letting her control the narrative, done being the guy who kept quiet just to keep the peace. I wanted this part of my life closed, once and for all. My lawyer said he'd start the process, file the restraining order, and we'd move forward with the divorce and the charges. It felt heavy, like a decision that could only end in disaster, but at the same time, I knew it was right. That night, as I sat in my room staring at the walls, I started remembering all the little moments with my wife that I'd brushed off. The time she'd blow up over something small, only to brush it off with a joke. The way she'd talk about her ex like he was some monster and she'd barely escaped. At the time, I'd believed it because she seemed so vulnerable, like she'd finally found someone she could trust. But now, looking back, it was clear she'd been telling me exactly what she wanted me to hear. And I'd eaten it up. There was one night about 6 months into dating that came back to me. We'd gone to a friend's party and she got drunk, really drunk. I wanted to go home, but she insisted on staying, saying I was ruining her fun. When I told her I was leaving, she threw a fit, yelling at me in front of everyone. At the time, I thought it was just a rough night, that maybe I'd done something wrong. But now, I could see it was just her trying to control me, to make sure I'd bend to her will. I don't know why it took me so long to see the signs, but maybe that's just how it goes. When you're in it, when you're convinced you love someone, you're blind to the things that should be obvious. And that's what made this all so much worse. It wasn't just that she hurt me, or that she took my dog, or that I was dealing with the legal mess. It was that I'd trusted her, really believed she was good for me. And now I had to face the fact that I'd been completely wrong. The next morning, my dad knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to join him for breakfast. It was a small thing, just eggs and toast, but it felt like this little slice of normal that I needed. We sat there in silence for a bit. Then he asked how I was holding up. I told him the truth, that I was struggling, that I felt stupid and embarrassed, and that part of me just wanted to leave it all behind. He didn't say much, just nodded, but it was like he understood everything I wasn't saying. After breakfast, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. Everything looked the same as it did when I was growing up, but I felt like a completely different person. I kept seeing people I used to know, neighbors who'd watched me grow up. I wondered if they'd heard anything, if they knew the mess I was in. It was a strange feeling, being home but not feeling like I belonged, like I was a guest in my own life. When I got back, I checked my phone and saw a message from one of my wife's friends. She wanted to clear the air and talk about what happened. I almost threw my phone across the room. It was ridiculous, the idea that anyone in her circle would want to clear the air after everything she'd done, but I knew better than to get into it with them. They only saw what she wanted them to see, and me arguing wasn't going to change that. So I deleted the message and moved on. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I was starting to let go, bit by bit. It wasn't easy, but it was like all the memories, all the anger, all the confusion was finally starting to fade. My life had been ripped apart, but in the quiet moments, I felt this strange sense of peace. Like maybe I was finally free. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't over it. Far from it. I had days where the anger bubbled up, days when I felt so stupid for falling for her tricks. But each day, the weight got a little lighter. My parents were there, my lawyer was working on the case, and I knew I was doing what I needed to do to protect myself. I realized that I'd been living under her control, letting her set the rules, and that maybe, just maybe, I was finally taking my life back. It was a long road ahead, and I knew there'd be more obstacles, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. And that small glimmer of hope, it was enough to keep me going. Update 3. All right. So I went ahead and filed for divorce. She was going to get served at her office, and honestly, I felt like a huge weight had lifted off my shoulders. It was the first step toward finally ending this whole nightmare. I didn't really plan to give an update here after filing because, to me, this was the end of the road. But then, the messages kept coming, people kept asking, and I realized maybe it had helped to lay out how things have played out. So here it goes. After I filed, there was a period of quiet. No messages, no surprise visits, nothing. For a bit, I thought maybe that was the end of it. I started to think maybe she'd accepted it. Maybe this would be as easy as just signing some papers and being done with each other. But one day, she showed up at my house. This time, though, I had cameras set up. I wasn't taking any more chances after what happened. She showed up with a bag full of stuff. My favorite snacks, drinks, a long handwritten apology letter. She looked like she was ready to burst into tears. She told me she was sorry, that she never meant to ruin my life, and that she barely remembered anything from that night because she was seeing red. She started talking about how she'd made a mistake, how she wished she could take it all back, and I just stood there, watching her put on this whole act. I didn't believe any of it. I didn't even touch the snacks or open the letter. I just wanted one thing from her. "Where's my dog?" I asked her straight up. That was all I cared about at that moment. She looked at me, wide-eyed, like she didn't know what I was talking about and said she didn't have him. But I know her better than that. Her face goes red whenever she's lying. And sure enough, I could see that same expression on her face now. I told her that if she didn't give my dog back, I'd be pressing charges and filing for a restraining order. That's when she finally broke down and admitted it. She told me that, yeah, she'd taken him. But then she said he ran away when she left a door open. She tried to sound like she cared, but it was obvious she didn't. My heart sank. This dog had been with me since I was 16. He was more than just a pet. He was family. The idea of him being gone just tore me up inside. But what could I do? She'd already let him go, and I had no idea if I'd ever see him again. After that, I told her to leave, and a few days later, she got served the divorce papers. I thought maybe this would finally be the end of it, that she'd understand we were done and move on, but of course, it wasn't. She showed up again, crying and begging for another chance. She kept saying she loved me, that we couldn't throw away everything we had just over a dog. That was when I saw red. I told her that this wasn't just about my dog, although losing him was enough to make me want her out of my life for good. I told her that she was abusive, manipulative, and that she seriously needed therapy and medical help. She had real problems, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix her. I made it clear that she was lucky I hadn't pressed more charges, and that all I wanted was a clean break, a divorce, and to never see her again. That's when she lost it and actually hit me again, right there on my doorstep. But this time, I was ready, and I had the cameras rolling. I called the cops, and when they arrived, she tried to twist things around again, telling them she'd hit me in self-defense and that I was holding her there. But the cameras didn't lie, and they took her away. I finally got the restraining order I'd been waiting for. It's been a few weeks since all of this went down, and I've been to every animal shelter nearby, hoping to find my dog. But he's nowhere. Each time I come back empty-handed, it hits me a little harder. It feels like I've lost a part of myself, and it's something I can't just get over. I keep going back to all the times I let her mistreat him, all the warning signs I ignored. I feel like I let him down, putting him in a situation where he wasn't safe. One day, I got a call from her ex-husband. He'd heard about everything from some mutual friends and wanted to share his experience with me. He told me that she'd done something similar to him, that she was good at putting on this remorseful act, promising she'd change, and convincing him to stay longer than he should have. Listening to him, it felt like he was describing my life. Every detail matched, down to the way she'd cry and apologize only to go right back to her old ways. He warned me to cut ties completely and move on, telling me not to let her pull me back in. In a weird way, it felt good to hear that I wasn't alone, that it wasn't just me. But it also made me even more determined to move forward and never look back. I was done with her, with the manipulation, the lies, all of it. People keep saying I should be happy now that I'm out of this marriage and the legal issues are mostly resolved. And yeah, I'm grateful it's almost over, but it doesn't feel like a happy ending. I lost my dog, my best friend, the one thing that was always there for me. I keep thinking about all the times I didn't stand up for myself, all the times I let things slide because I thought I loved her. That's the hardest part. Not just losing him, but realizing how deep I'd let myself fall under her control. The support from everyone here has meant a lot. All the comments and messages have been this steady reminder that I'm not alone, that there are people who care and want me to get through this. Some days it's still tough. I have these moments where I feel the anger, the regret, wondering if I'll ever fully recover. But then I remind myself that I made it out. I have my family, a few new friends, and I've taken back control of my life. There are days where it feels like moving forward is the hardest thing in the world, but I know that with each step, I'm putting more distance between me and everything she put me through. Maybe that's all I can do for now. Keep going, one day at a time, and hope that somewhere down the line, I'll finally find peace.